I'd like to welcome Craig, the creator and founder of Lensbaby, and Michael, a VP of Sales and Marketing. We are going to talk about how to get the most out of the Lensbaby lenses when shooting films. Craig, Michael, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It sounds like I've got a Harley
Awesome.
behind me on the street here, so it might get a little loud, so I'll keep myself muted until I talk. But no, doing fantastic. It's great to be on your Zoom call and look forward to answering some questions.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Mike?
doing awesome. Thanks for the opportunity to come and chat with you all. It's very, I think it's been a great conversation.
Thank you. This is really exciting because I know we have never met in real life, and actually this is the very first time when we talk and have a real conversation in real time. And I'm so very excited because what I know about the Lensbaby, I did read a few articles on your website, and that the amazing story about how it all started, the Lensbaby history, those 5 parts. I'll put a link in the notes to this chat so everyone can grab it. And of course, you can find out more about Lensbaby lenses at lensbaby.com. So from what I have read, I imagine that you are the person, Craig, who comes up with new ideas and stands behind all the creations, new designs for lenses and Lensbaby products. Is this correct?
Yep, that's my job. They put me in a corner and say, come up with new product, and that's what I do. I do a couple other things, especially during these crazy times, but that's the most important, and that's the kind of thread over the last 16, actually closer to 20 years, because I was developing before I started the company. But yeah, we need to be creative when we're in a new situation, any new situation, and this is just another opportunity for that.
Talking about the creativity and the opportunities, because I know that you grew your passion for photography in college. Is it studied in college, right? And what kind of photography were you doing, and how did it lead you to the idea of developing a new type of lenses? What pushed you actually to create something completely new and present it to the world?
Yeah, so I started doing photography professionally in college, and it was just working for the school paper, and I think I was getting paid $14 every 2 weeks, and I was probably working 30 hours a week. So it was just a pure passion. Like, I loved photography, I loved learning more, and fast forward to 2000 when I got my first digital camera, and in between there, I became a photojournalist. I was working for newspapers and magazines, and over the course of that time, and then weddings and commercial became part of my work. Over the course of that time, I got really good at the fly on the wall, perfect images of wonderful moments and great subject matter. That was something that I was accomplished at, and I wanted to learn more. And so Lensbaby came out of that desire to learn new things. And I just started playing with different lenses once I got a digital camera, whatever I could put on my camera. And out of that, other photographers kept asking me, how'd you take that picture? How'd you take that picture? And I'd tell them, and then they'd want one. And so I'd make one for my friends, and they essentially became beta testers. And over the course of that time, about 4 years of experimentation, I decided to form a company, and in 2004 we started introducing our first lenses to the market, and the rest is history.
That's really impressive, Craig. From what I hear now, that you wanted to experiment more and you wanted to explore more, and like to get those moments like no other people do that. So, and people started asking you, how did you do that? So practically you are giving to people kind of a new experience, right? It's not a typical lens that you shoot with. So it's like everybody is asking you, how did you do that? And so people do really, well, discover their voice with Lensbaby lenses. And by the way, I can tell you from my own experience that it happened to me as well, because the very first image that I took with Lensbaby lenses, it was the optic Suite 35 that you sent me to test. And actually, it was my very first image of a husband and a girl playing in the bedroom. And I took it with the Suite 35 optics. And actually, it ended up in the campaign for Lensbaby Mother's Day contest. And it was a test shot, my first image I ever took with these lenses. And I was literally in awe because that was also a transformational experience for me. Because after so many years that I was adding a lot of creative effects and doing adjustments to my images in Photoshop and Lightroom, and later on I was also trying to do that in Premiere Pro with films, you know, all those kind of tilt shift effects or fish eye effects. So it was taking so much time, and then I literally realized that that was it, that those kind of in-camera effects that I could get right in camera, it was such a discovery for me. And by that time, I really wished that I could learn a little bit more about the story behind this product, because I always had this question in my mind that, and I always wanted to ask you, what was your vision for these lenses? What kind of experience can a filmmaker or a photographer get from shooting with these lenses? How can these lenses complement their photography, filmmaking experience?
Yeah, I would say that it does complement. That's a good word for it, because creativity isn't about using something weird. Like, that's not where it starts. Creativity really starts with learning a craft and becoming comfortable with it, and then saying, what can I add to that? What can I do differently? What can I do to set me apart from what other people are doing? And the reality is, that's photography, and good photography has been defined in a certain way to where it's quite easy to set yourself apart in the sense, if you choose to do something different, if you choose to, 99.9% of all photographs are they're going to have no motion in them. They're going to have very little blur, if any. You know, I mean, a first step into that would be to shallow depth of field by opening up your lenses or shooting brighter lenses. And then Lensbaby is really a progression of that, to say, okay, and let's move. Let's move quite a bit away from the pack and say, is this, can these optical effects, which Lensbaby provides instead of digital effects after the fact, is it something that I connect with? Is it part of my vision for the world? And two, what am I going to see different in the world because I'm looking through the camera? Like you said, in-camera effects, it's different than if you're thinking ahead of, you know, what if I shot this straight? What if I shot this all in focus or with the shallow depth of field and then added some additional effect later? You're going to take different images when you're looking through the optical effect that you're going to end up with later. And so having that in your pocket and having the ability to say, you know, I've mastered this craft, or I'm in the process of mastering it. I know certain things about it. Now I want to branch out.
A great answer, Greg. I have to say, because I have already another 3 things to come back to you, and I'm going to do it a little bit late. Michael, I know you are a filmmaker, and I know that you shot a lot of campaigns for Lensbaby. Is it correct?
I wouldn't say I've shot, well, some, yes and no. You know, when I first came in, we did some smaller pieces, mainly for YouTube, but we've also done really big productions as well, in which we'll team up with a lot of people. So yes and no.
Okay, and how long have you been shooting with Lensbaby lenses? Did you find it challenging at first, or do you approach the lenses the same way? How much are they different to you? What would you recommend? I mean, like, what would, from your experience, how do you approach that?
I've been shooting Lensbaby for a very long time, because I actually had a Lensbaby 2.0. And this is dating back to when I was a wedding photographer and kind of stepping out into becoming a professional in the mid-2000s. And I happened to just go into a camera store, and my friend John was like, hey, you should try this thing. And I was like, okay. And it was one of those things, like with many people back then, you kind of experimented with it and then it went in your bag. And then what happened is I came to Portland, Oregon about 4 years ago, and I had decided to retire from wedding photography. I just didn't want to do it any longer. And somehow, serendipity, the world universe, put me in connection with Lensbaby, and next thing you know, here I am working for the company. And what was really fascinating about that, especially at the beginning, is I was absolutely tired of being a photographer. I was tired of holding a camera. I was tired of taking photos. I was honestly just bored with it because I'd been doing it for so long. And there's something invigorating about using a Lensbaby lens that challenges you as a creative to, if you're like me, to go back to your roots, because that's, you know, the exposure triangle, a manual focus, and learning how to actually like take photos. And so that there was a hearken to that where I felt like, oh, wow, this reminds me of what it was like 25 years ago when I was a little kid, like figuring out on a Canon AE1. And so then I'm in this position where I'm with the company and I get to play with and experiment with these lenses and kind of understand them. And what I think happened more so than anything, I got to have that same experience that someone who would buy from us would, in that, A, you're a little bit frustrated, but on the other side of that, when you create an amazing image, it is just enthralling, right? You feel amazing. And then B, you realize that the sterileness of photography today, and that everything is so the same. What Lensbaby does is let you stand out. And that to me was exciting, because I realized that even though I had this differentiation in the way that I shot, everything just always felt the same. And Lensbaby gave me the opportunity to feel different.
This is practically every time, and the same experience that I get when I shoot with Lensbaby, and I really get something wonderful. It's like, whoa, it blows my mind again, and I go again and shoot something else completely different. Thank you, Michael. That's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing with your experience and your background. Do you have any tips on how to get familiar with these lenses? And are the lenses different? And how do you approach them, like the lenses? Because the optics are different and they do different effects.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I would love to hear Craig weigh in on this too, because he may have a different approach than me. I think the first thing that you have to think about when you're approaching, let's say you haven't used Lensbaby before, one of the best things that you can do is just look at the imagery that we have, right? We have fantastic photos from photographers around the world that have shot with every one of our lenses and optics. I think the first thing you have to do, and this is my perspective, is look at what one of these effects really feels like it's something that would contribute to the way that I shoot. And my experience was edge, because I love the slice of focus. I love the way that your eyes just go directly to that plane where you want people to see. And that to me stood out. And I was like, oh, this is the way that I want to shoot with Lensbaby. I love the Edge series. They're my favorites. And then I look at something like Sweet and I go, okay, that doesn't necessarily fit in my wheelhouse, but that may be exactly what you're looking for, right? And so I think the best thing that you can do is go and look at the photography on our website, because one of the things we wanted to make sure of was to put this really high resolution photography on our site to give people inspiration into stepping into a lens. Because I think it's one thing to just kind of look at pictures, and it's another thing when you can kind of get the full inclusive story and understanding of it, right? Because like, even if you look at, you know, a picture of a sunset, well, that sunset looks very different with a Sweet 80 than it does with a Velvet versus an Edge, right? And that's one of the really fantastic things about our product line as a whole, is even if you have one, it doesn't mean you're going to get the same effect when you have the other. And that's, if you want variety, I would just say buy them all, right? Because then you always have the ability to kind of figure out what, you know, what applies to what scene. But if you're like me, I love Edge, I love Burnside, like those are my favorites.
The way these lenses work, they are not like your typical lenses that you can mount on a camera and just to point on a subject or whatever you are shooting, right? And just shoot. And I see so many people are actually struggling with them, and they find them challenging, trying to figure out how the lenses work. So, Craig, what if you were just starting out? Is there a lens that you would pick or you would recommend to get started with and immerse yourself in the learning experience? What lens would it be?
So The learning experience, there is definitely a learning curve with all of our lenses, and if somebody just pulls it out and expects, like, you know, when they get a new phone or when they get a new camera, that they're just going to have success, um, it's not the same. You know, you definitely need to put some time in. I would say that the simplest lens that we have in terms of that learning curve is the Sol series, which is our Sol 45 for mirrorless and DSLRs, and then for micro four thirds mirrorless, we have a Sol 22, and which gives essentially the same effect as a full frame. And what's great about those is we have limited some of the choices. You can't tilt as far. So when you're using a sweet spot lens, especially on an APS-C sensor, in the optic swap system, you can tilt the composer so far that your sweet spot is completely off the frame, and people get confused by that. And so we've limited the sweet spot movement right here with this this lens that I've got on my computer. You can see the sweet spot is in the center, but with the Sol, you can move that sweet spot into the rule of thirds, or on the APS-C with the Sol 45, you can move it a little bit further off into the corner, but you don't have to worry about moving it completely off of your frame. And then also you've got a great effect in the bokeh blades, which allow you to create a texture in the background. You can see kind of the streaky background that's going on here with this particular lens. You can actually align that bokeh in a certain direction with the bokeh blade. So that's a great starter lens. You know, my recommendation there is assuming that you connect with the sweet spot of photography. Michael said that he's more into the slice, and some people are more into our standalone lenses that have a velvety glow over the detail at the brighter apertures, or they have swirl in the background instead of more of a regular bokeh, or the streaky bokeh that you see in some of our sweet spot lenses. And so it really depends on what you're after. The standalone lenses eliminate the tilt, so you don't have to worry about being tilted in the wrong direction or losing your sweet spot, or you know, having a slice that's too thin or too wide. And so, you know, some people are going to connect with different effects that Lensbaby offers.
You're right, and it's so true, because, you know, like, there are so many people who get really frustrated about the focus issues, because how do you actually nail when shooting with Lensbaby lenses? How do you nail the focus? What's the focus zone? I get this question a lot, because I know lots of people are really having hard times to get the focus they want it to be. We know that this is a selective area and you get creative with that. But anyways, how do you actually focus with these lenses?
Yeah, it takes practice. It's that learning curve. Are you going to take out a brand new lens that focuses in a different way? It might tilt. It does these things that no other lens you've ever owned does, and it expects you to be part of the process instead of just pushing one button and expecting it to give you something that you're satisfied with. You're now a co-creator with your equipment again. You know, as maybe you were if you started on film, like Michael mentioned the Canon AE1. You know, you're much more involved when you're shooting on film or when you're shooting manual focus. And with Lensbaby, you're involved with things that have never been a part of a camera lens before. So, or you know, certainly not shown as a feature. A lot of these things that we introduce are giving you options that were accidental in the past. So we're intentionally bringing these effects that you can do optically into our lenses to create to give you more options. And that hasn't you know, no other camera maker does that. They bring out a lens and they say, oh, it's not that great, or it's a classic lens, so it has things going on in it that other lenses don't, but they don't really maximize, and they don't teach their users how to maximize it. And so our community and the things that Michael is working on, you know, he talked about the the presentations that he's done for Lensbaby really gives people like a whole new palette to work with. If you're a painter, we're giving you new colors, we're giving you new brushes, we're giving you a different way to see the world.
That's awesome.
I think that if you are going to step into using Lensbaby as a photographer, you have to come to the understanding that one of the ways you can become really acclimated to being proficient with our product is to kind of eliminate the thought process that you have to get this perfect shot, right? Because one of the things that we do really well is we separate ourselves from that. And we say, hey, you know what? Who gets to define perfect? You do, as a photographer and as a creative. And if it's out of focus, or some of the best photos I've ever taken in my life are out of focus silhouette shots that I've had, be in magazines and things like that, because there's something really beautiful in that moment where you have something that stands out that differentiates you from everyone else. So, people always say, oh, how do I get focus? How do I get focus? I say, well, how do you define focus? You get to decide what that is.
Exactly. This is a great advice, Michael, especially for those filmmakers or photographers just starting out and to shoot with these lenses. And even those who already have this lens, but they never have figured out how to focus or how to shoot with them. This is a great advice. Thank you so much. But I was wondering, how do you get intentional with these lenses? How do you actually develop your style and voice? Because, we hear this all the time that people say, find your voice, develop your style. How do Lensbaby lenses help you with this?
I think going out and committing to any particular lens and limiting yourself and saying, I'm just going to learn this. I'm going to see what this focal length or what this effect will show me about the world that I don't see otherwise. I heard a great quote that I always come back to in my work and in conversations like this, and that's that an artist doesn't paint what she sees what she knows how to paint. And that comes from the tools that she has. So if an artist has a certain brush or a certain palette, or they're painting on a certain surface, they're going to have a very different work of art when they're done, and that process is going to be very different than if they were working with other tools. And so having the ability to hand you a different brush or a different palette to work with allows you to see a world that you wouldn't otherwise see. And that's the main difference. Yes, you can get something compelling with software after the fact. I use software to change my images, not just color and contrast, but also to do more significant changes. That's a great tool. However, if I'm out in the field, I want to be seeing in that moment. I want to get into a flow state with my creativity and with my photography and with the way I see the world. And the way I find that's most consistent to do that is to be looking through the lens, to be working with tactile things that are organic and not necessarily coming in and trying to change something perfect into something that has more of an emotional aspect to it, because I'm just going to see things differently. But to answer your question, it's time. Take one thing, limit yourself to one, whether it's a 50 millimeter, a nifty 50 that you got for $100, or if it's a $400 special effect lens that you got from Lensbaby. Limit yourself to that. Spend some time with it. Be frustrated at the beginning, and then see if you start to break through and find what you see about the world through that particular lens or that focal length or that aperture or whatever it is that you're changing and limiting yourself to. See how you see the world differently, and then it's going to fit into your bag and into your kind of repertoire of your visual voice in a way that you wouldn't otherwise see.
You're right. And I totally agree with you that you have completely to limit yourself and just spend weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months just on one tool, learning the tool, and make time for this, do this, and get familiar with any tool. That's no wonder. Make hundreds and hundreds of images until you have propelled yourself towards a new way of creating, right?
Lensbaby, sorry to interrupt, but as you're saying that, making hundreds and hundreds of images, I can walk around the block with my children and take pictures of them with our dog,
Exactly.
you know, on a leash, and do 150 images, and it takes 20 minutes. And I didn't
Right.
have that opportunity. I don't think Lensbaby could have happened in the film days, at least not in the way that it has.
Yeah.
I know for me,
Absolutely.
it wasn't until I went digital that I was willing to start taking pictures that were out of the ordinary. And I think now that we are digital, taking hundreds of images is, you know, it can be done in minutes, and it doesn't cost you a thing.
Right, because oftentimes it takes many attempts to learn the quirks of something new. All right, I really, really love it. And now I have something to get more in depth with the world of cinematography. And what I mean by that cinematography is practically photography for motion pictures. It brings together all the strictly photographic elements that produce the images we see projected on the screen, and the shape of the image, how it's created, and what it means, like lighting and its effect of an image, and all the camera work, and the movement, of course. But the integral part of it all, also the lenses also. So the lens is used to record the images that shape the image and the way the viewers see it on the screens. Because when it comes to motion pictures, they're actually flat, and all sense of depth is an illusion. And we watch films practically in a two-dimension boundary, a window through which a part of the film's world is revealed to us. But what's inside the film is physical and material, and we see what is in the frame, and it looks real, like defined and three-dimensional. And so here comes the question. With ordinary prime or zoom lenses, it's pretty straightforward. You create this depth within the frame by means of the focal length, the distance to the subject or whatever you are shooting, in the aperture. But how does it work with the lenses? For example, the same edge optics, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, so I guess I would point to, you know, I'm using the sweet spot lens, just a lens I made for my laptop, and you can see the motion that's happening in the background, or the apparent motion, and kind of bringing a three-dimensional aspect to it. The twist optics give that kind of popping forward of your subject almost three-dimensionally. Like you said, we're looking at flat screens. We're looking at three-dimensional worlds that have been interpreted into two dimensions to share. And the more we can get that depth of field. So what we're looking at in sweet spot lenses, like what you're looking at here, is a curved field of focus. So that curve comes in, so it's coming through my face and back out around here, and that dimension of having a curved field of focus rather than a flat field is one way to give your images dimension. The twist creates a swirl in just the background and not in the foreground. The edge, as you mentioned, gives you the ability to focus near to far. So my hand could be in focus here, my face could be in focus there, and then infinity would be in focus here. And if my other hand was here, it would be totally out of focus. So I could have, you know, one hand in focus and the other hand completely out of focus. Not that that would make a great image, but that's a good illustration. And I've got hands to illustrate it with. But regardless, you can do things that allow us to give a perception of depth that's different than what we're programmed to see. The way we have been trained to perceive depth through an image is very different. I went into an art gallery when I was in Birmingham for the photography show last year, and I was walking around and looking at these 300-year-old paintings, and there was no depth of field. It was infinite depth of field. And I went, of course, that's the way our eyes see. Now, our eyes see one spot of focus, but as long as we're looking at that spot, you essentially have infinite depth of field. If you close one eye, I can see, my laptop screen and the grass behind it and the building behind that, and they're all essentially in focus. Now, there's a little bit of depth of field there, but until photography came to be and until cameras came to be, shallow depth of field wasn't a thing for humans. But that's one language that's used to create depth, and it's because photography started on 8x10 or 11x14 or larger pieces of film or on walls or whatever it was. All of a sudden, you had shallow depth of field as a visual expression, a way to see the world. Lensbaby's giving you a bunch of different ways to manipulate that and to be unique.
I would say also to kind of coattail on that, one of the things that's really unique is when you watch films and you see something in the background in the frame and you go, that just feels different, that looks different. There's something about that, that feels, whether it be glowy or magical. That one of the amazing things about our lenses, which I think they're underutilized is in creating videography and filmography. I think that when you look at, if you're going to be a cinematographer, you have to understand how to pull focus. You have to understand how to create depth with the lenses that you have. And one of the things that automatically you're set up with when it comes into Lensbaby lenses is the fact that they're manual. You already know how to pull focus, and instead of going into special effects on the back end and spending hundreds of hours, trying to get the effect, many times you go, oh, I could use Lensbaby to capture that effect in camera, get it within 2 or 3 takes, and then I can send it off to editing. So that's one of the amazing benefits of using Lensbabies for cinematography is they're primed for it. They really are, because it just seems to me that, when you look at it, well, let's say from a professional perspective, I would much rather spend an hour on set getting the shot right in camera and knowing what I have going into post than spending 30 hours in post trying to get something right.
That's a great point. Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Mike, I want to just emphasize that Michael's dead on with that comment, because what I'm seeing is oftentimes I'll start, especially during this time, I'll start a new series and on Netflix or Amazon, and here's this series that has tons of CGI and all of these great things coming on, and then there's a Lensbaby Suite 35 image or sequence that comes in there, and it's complementary. Like I said earlier, it's not that it's the only tool, it's another tool in your toolbox. So if you're already doing green screen and you've got your effects and everything's great, but you've got this one shot that it's like, oh, that's going to take me 1 hour versus 30 hours, like Michael said, then all of a sudden it makes tons of sense. Even though you're proficient in other ways of doing it, this is yet another thing that you can have in your toolbox.
Definitely, because what it takes a lot of people to create these CGI effects in post rather than shooting in camera. I absolutely agree with that. Here we had a question from Reem. When you are filming more than one person at a time, sometimes you find that, for example, creatively placing the slice of focus with the edge, when we are talking about the edge, on one person, when more people are in the scene, may not look good. So in this case, would you say that the edge optics should be preferably used for creating a film based on one subject or isolating that subject? What are your thoughts about that?
I would say this. The thing that is really interesting about shooting film with edge is that because of that slice of focus and the way that planes work, if you don't have it straight across, then yes, you're going to have things out of focus. Once you go diagonal, right, or vertical, then you get these different planes of focus. And so those slices change based on the depth. And I think about it like this. you probably first need to decide how you, and this is just from my perspective, and I may be wrong, but I think first you have to decide how you want your depth of field to look. What do you want in frame? And then build around that in that kind of scenario. So I would say, okay, if I have these three people standing across from each other, I want all of their eyes in focus, right? They're all straight on, they're here, here, here. Then I know that I need a horizontal plane of focus on that edge. Because if I go vertical, then I'm only gonna have one person in focus and the other two will be blurred out. If I go horizontal, then it'll, be that same, or excuse me, diagonal, then it'll be that same effect. So I think the first thing that you have to do, and one of the things that most filmmakers or new filmmakers are not doing is storyboarding. So you should do a storyboard, make sure you know exactly what it is that you want to shoot going in, and thus you're mitigating the risk of mistakes because you already know, okay, I know if I'm using edge and I want this kind of scene, I need to step in it with that setup in that way. So that's my thought.
Thank you. Talking about storyboarding, because Lensbaby lenses are all about choices and stylistic decisions. Well, when it comes to filmmaking, you do lots of planning. I was wondering, what is your process for selecting the lenses for a particular shot? How do you choose the lens? What are you going to shoot?
Yeah, I think, and Craig may have some thoughts too, and I'll start. I think that pre-production is as important, if not more important than production, because in pre-production, you are getting things ready to go. You are setting up your storyboards, you're creating your timelines, you're putting your shoot schedules together, you're building out equipment bids for the days, and you're so on and so on and so on. And literally a 1 minute commercial could take 400 hours of pre-production. Now, that's an exaggeration, but it is possible, right? And so I think the first thing that you have to decide, and this kind of comes back to, how do you choose a Lensbaby? Well, you go look at the images. How do you choose what image or what lens to use in film? I think if you're kind of just building out a film and you have some rough ideas, then you need to go and shoot sample footage, right? You need to be able to go shoot and be able to reference that footage and go, okay, is this look at this time of day the right look for me, right? Because one of the things that you have to think about is, the last thing you have time for on set is to have to make adjustments that can cause huge production hours, right? And so if you come in with that game plan, you go, okay, for the scene of Craig and the kids walking down the street, we know that we're using Suite 35. Well, when Anita is in the car driving down the street and it's sunset, we're using Velvet 56 because we know what those effects are that we're trying to achieve within that scene. And that all comes down to pre-production. That all comes down to making notes and putting in the effort up front of understanding, especially if you're the DP and you're the director and you have a cinematographer and you have this whole team. It's a lot easier, right? Because then you go, hey, right, Bob, go do that thing, figure this out. But when it's you as a solo videographer or cinematographer and you're against either a budget or a timeline, like you have to know what you're doing going in. So, you eliminate the mistakes that you can make. Right.
So practically, you actually know what you expect from these lenses, right? And as it's been said, sometimes things go a little different, right? From what you are planning initially. And however, do you always see the outcome in your mind, like you led, or for example, you led the situation to develop and see what you can do with it in post-production?
Yeah, I think, Nate, as a part of being creative, like you have to be willing to accept the fact that you're never going to step into something and get exactly what you want. There's always going to be something that happens, right? Somehow the dog ran across the street, or, there's the fire trucks in the background, or whatever that thing is, there's always going to be something. And I think there's something to be said about the events of happy mistakes and being able to really step into those as a creative, because you may find out that you do get on set and you're shooting Velvet 56, but the sun isn't right and it's like killing the image, and you're like, okay, we need to make an adjustment right now. I need to kill this background. I need sweet. And so in that moment, you're making that adjustment. You're doing that thing, right? So I think you always have to, there's a point in which you can be too strenuous and too planned and too like on the point, and in doing so, you can limit creativity that comes from just showing up.
That's really interesting. And What about the model range of Lensbaby lenses itself? What would you specifically recommend something for filmmaking, some particular lens, or is there any lens that stands out more for a filmmaker's needs? For example, the Velvet 28, this is a wide angle lens, which is awesome for establishing shots. And what are your thoughts about that? Let's say, what would you recommend for a filmmaker in particular?
So we've had a lot of requests for the set of velvets that we currently have for filmmakers, and while we are looking to do some different features in terms of clickless apertures and whatnot in a and gearing for that market, they're great as is to use in that, to use for, like you said, for establishing shots for the wider end, but then being able to move into the longer shots for Velvet 56 and from Velvet 56 and Velvet 85, and still get that dreamy, totally variable from a really strong effect at the bright apertures to hardly any effect at f5.6 or darker, and to be able to have more than just depth of field to work with is great, and that speaks to all of our lenses, that we're not just, as you stop it down, you generally get a different effect. You get
Right.
a larger sweet spot, you get less of the velvety glow, you get less of the swirl, and then as you open it up, you get more effect. So Lensbaby apertures are much more about effect control than they are about light control, and so coming in and saying, what do I know about my Lensbaby lenses? And that's where the learning curve comes in, so that like we're talking about here is mastering something before you end up out in the field with it and it becomes obvious. And also doing that planning that Michael suggested of having, the sample shots, having the situation really planned out, so that when you're out there, not only do you have you explored the gear, but you've also explored the situation, so that you're matching that effect to your image.
That's true, because as you stop down, you already get completely different look with these lenses. So it's not like you have only one lens, you get the same all the time. No, not at all. Okay, a question. This one is about stabilization on Lensbaby lenses. Since the H80 is a long lens, does it have any stabilization as compared to a normal 80mm lens? And when you hand hold your camera and shoot a film, for example, with the slightest shake, it's like it shows like a big unstable video. So do you have any stabilization?
We don't offer any stabilization in our lenses, but a lot of bodies do have that built in as far as sensor shift in Sony, and then I believe the Nikons as well allow sensor shift. And because I'm not shooting in those systems and don't use the in-camera stabilization, I'll let Michael speak a little bit more to that.
Yes,
also, Olympus, they have an amazing like 6-axis system, which I think they now have 7 even. But what I would say first and foremost, and this is not to be harsh, do not handhold your camera to shoot film. Go buy a gimbal, go buy a stabilizer. You can buy weight-based gimbal, hand gimbals for like $150. You can buy a really nice automated gimbal or machine gimbal for $300-400. You're always going to have camera shake when you handhold, because as a human being, you're not stable. And when I walk and I move forward, like my hand will up and down, my shoulders move, my hips move, my feet move, my ankles, everything moves. So you will never have stabilization out of hand holding in the same way that you would in using a gimbal. You can get better and you can learn how to like leverage a strap over your shoulder and create tension and things of that nature. But I would definitely suggest that you think less of hand holding and more of like, okay, how do I make this stable by using the tools that are available to me?
I hear you, especially when you shoot scenes for production, big production, and you want this to look really professional. I totally agree with you. But for folks just starting out in filmmaking, what would you recommend?
So I I find that the heavier my camera is, the more stable I'm able to hold it. And so a little tiny, like a phone, is really hard to get something that's not jittery, and that's what, but it doesn't matter these days because it's already got built-in stabilization. But if I have a 80 to 200 or a motor drive grip on or battery grip these days on the bottom of my camera, I can hold it steadier. And so that's one thing. It seems counterintuitive, but it creates more muscle reaction. To hold it up instead of moving it around. And then the other aspect of it is just holding it out and being really smooth. I mean, if I have, say I put a cup of coffee in my shirt pocket and I walked up a flight of steps, it'd be all over the front of me. But my hand out in front of me can keep that cup of coffee as I'm running or as I'm moving up the stairs. It can keep it from spilling. The same idea with a camera. Have two hands out there holding your camera to give it that natural movement. And that would be, other than the technology of figuring out your camera's in camera stabilization, which you may need to manually put in a focal length because different focal lengths need a different amount of stabilization, and that technology may be limited with a non-electronic lens. But just finding that spot, like Michael said, if you're standing still, to be able to brace your camera with a strap or against your face or leaning into a wall, to be able to do that. Those are all techniques to use. Put it on the ground, put it on a fence post, put it in a place where you've got something else that can stabilize it.
Thank you for answering the questions and giving us more clarity about all things Lensbaby, because there are a lot of questions about Lensbabies all the time. And Lensbaby lenses are all about creative choices and solutions. And there are always questions about how to use the lens and how it actually works and what kind of effects any particular lens creates. And as of today, how can people learn more about the lenses? I know that you have Lensbaby University, and you do your best to help people to get started with the lenses and help them, guide them through all the optics. And could you please tell us a little bit more about the university? Is it free, or how can one join the university?
Yeah, Lensbaby University, you can go to university.lensbaby.com, and there is a lot of overview of our lenses. There are some courses on there that photographers have done with us for different lenses and different series. Recently, we released a video series with Kathleen Clemens around macro flower photography. We're working on a bunch of new series like those, so some more in-depth content. And soon we'll be looking at putting some more of the Lensbaby University content just out into YouTube and on our social media channels. Also one of the things that we did when we built lensbaby.com, the new updated website, is we wanted to make it very informational. So on any given product page, there are 3 to 6 videos, there's 8 to 12 photos, there's a bunch of overview and information and data and charts and graphs and specs and all of the things that give you all the information you need. One of the things we wanted to do was put all of the information possible in one page for you, because a lot of people do have questions when they get a little bit deeper into, okay, I don't know which one to choose. And so we wanted to help give you the tool to educate yourself on lensbaby.com when you're looking at the product pages. But one of the things we're always working on is creating more information, more content, giving people more knowledge and information, because we realize as a brand, like we spoke to a couple of times now, it's really difficult just to pick up a Lensbaby and be great at it. It takes work and effort, but we want to help streamline you into that by showing you examples and giving you tools ahead of time.
Right. You have a lot of images on website and a huge gallery, so people can really see what the effects are. Thanks for the information about the university, because I also find there are a lot of lessons on how to work Lens, how it works, how you actually screw it on, how you change swap the optics. Thank you for that. And I know that you also have a community, the Facebook community Lensbaby Unplugged. Who's this community for, and how you can join it?
Yeah, Lensbaby Unplugged is an open community on Facebook. So if you go to facebook.com/groups/Lensbaby Unplugged, or just search Lensbaby Unplugged, it's a group that we came up with a few years ago that was really about giving our photographers a place to celebrate the imagery and the work that they create amongst each other. And so now it's heading somewhere in the window, I think about 6,000 members. And it's one of those things where it's not only a place where photographers come in and share, but people who perhaps are curious about Lensbaby can also step in and ask questions and learn. And it is literally a community because everyone there is very supportive. It's kind of self-sustaining. And it is one of the best places to seek advice or guidance, right? Because Craig and I aren't always available, but that community is always there, and they're so helpful and so kind. And I'm sure some of you who are in this call right now have been in Unplugged, and you can kind of see how amazing it is when the community comes together to not only help, but to inspire as well.
That's true. That's true. I really enjoy being a member of this community, and also I mostly enjoy to see all the images that people create within this community, because it's gorgeous and there is so much creativity and gives you so much ideas for yourself to create and go out there and just shoot. That's amazing. So yes, please join. If you are not a member of the community yet, please join. Okay, that's great. And thank you, Craig, and thank you, Michael, for joining us in this creative discussion and giving some clarity on how to get the most out of the Lensbaby lenses when shooting films. And we really appreciate you, and it was extremely helpful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. It was Jinx. It was an honor to be here, and I think I found my new office here in Maupin. So all my future podcasts will be at the edge of the Deschutes River.
Thank you again.
All right, great.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye bye.